G'day, I'm Patrick. Welcome to the chaos. I am going to turn these timber objects, which I clamped up in the last video, into some shapely table legs. I'm going to show you today how to cut the same shape out of lots of pieces of timber using a pattern or a template. So I've designed this thing on the computer. You don't need to see the final shape just yet, but you can just see that I've got measurements all over it. And then I've transferred those lines, including all the radiuses, radii, onto my NDF piece here. I'm going to go through and erase all the lines that I don't need, and then I'll cut this out using a combination of bandsaw and whatever else it takes, and then bring that line to exactly the line that I've drawn. Smooth it all out so the transitions are perfect, and then I can use that as a template. These are the blanks here. They're already joined up. There's 4 of them, and this template will sit on these blanks to allow us to cut that shape. I also have another component, which is this leg assembly. And again, I've made the template out of MDF and the sub-assembly out of timber. So the basic principle here is we can use this template to cut out this shape on a larger piece of timber. And the way we do that is with a router bit with a bearing. So we can either have a flush trim bit, which has the bearing on the tip of the router bit, or a pattern following bit, which has the router bit on the bottom or on the shank, or some combination of both, which have a bearing on the top and the bottom. We'll talk a bit more about the router bits as we move forward, but the first step in this process is we use our pattern to draw the shape onto the timber, which I've done here, and then you cut out as much waste as possible. Now this is an interesting one because these bits, very easy to cut out on the bandsaw, it's external. These parts are internal, I can't get the bandsaw blade in there. So I'm gonna have to cut out the waste using a jigsaw. Depending on the shape, you could use a drill press. In some instances, you're not gonna be able to cut out the waste, and you will just have to remove all of that waste with the router. But it's a lot of material to remove with a router. If you look at this line at the bottom, there's about 3 centimeters of timber there to remove, and that would be a lot of sawdust. Whereas if I can remove that waste right to the line, or just shy of the line like I have here, then my routing operation will be a lot cleaner, less tear out, just a lot more manageable overall. Jigsaw blades do have a tendency to bend when passing through thick timber, so I'm not going to cut too close to the line because I will risk cutting into the shape that I want to route out. But I'm going to see how this goes. If that doesn't work, I'll just have to use the router bit itself, and I'll go down in multiple passes. All right, so I jigsawed this out, and it is not pretty, but it doesn't have to be because we're going to clean all of that up with the router. I've just got rid of as much of the waste as possible. It is a lot easier if you don't have a captive area because you can just use a bandsaw and get a cleaner result. Now it is time to fix our template onto our work. This needs to be really firm because if it moves, your template is useless and it is not going to give you the shape you want it to be. Now, in some applications, you could screw it on if you knew the screw holes weren't going to be visible. That is not possible for this. You could use straight up double-sided tape. That does work a lot of the time. However, I recently did a job where the double-sided tape just moved slightly and it scared me a lot. So I want this to be super accurate. What I'm going to do is lay down some blue tape on both surfaces and then use CA glue or super glue. You don't need to super glue the whole thing. You just need kind of a dot in each corner, and you need to make sure that the tape is perfectly flat. So no bits that have curled up at all, because that will mean you have a not flat joint. The reason I'm doing that is because the super glue bond is very, very stiff. It has no flex. Blue tape is less flexible than most double-sided tapes. Double-sided tapes have quite a thick glue layer, which means they have a tendency to smear or wiggle a little bit. The reason I'm not just super gluing this to my work is because that would be almost impossible to get off. But if I put tape on this and tape on the work and super glue in between, I should be able to pry this off pretty cleanly and it will be stiff. So I'm going to put a thin line of CA glue on the tape on my work and then spray the accelerator on the other side and put them together. This is tricky because once this touches, it sets almost immediately and it needs to be in exactly the right position. The way I would recommend getting it perfect is figure out which corner you want aligned. I know I want this top corner aligned, and I can position it like this without the glue touching, and then I can lower it down so that that bottom corner is aligned and the whole thing will be perfect that way. I've actually decided not to use the accelerator. It'll give me a tiny bit more time to position these. I'll clamp them for a couple of minutes and then it'll be set. Okay, so the template is glued to the work, and now we need to talk about routing and how we're going to do it. And a really important part of that is talking about grain direction and tear out. Our template is on the back, but for illustrative purposes, I'm going to work on the other side. Let's look at this part of the timber just here. You can clearly see all of the grain exiting the timber on this side, which means we have exposed timber fibers here. When you look at a big router bit, it has directional blades that are spinning, so they're essentially moving in one way or the other. And depending on if we have this router bit facing down or facing up, as in if we're using a handheld router or a table router, it will affect the direction that the blades are hitting our actual timber. So if this router bit is spinning clockwise, because we're coming down from the top in this instance, each individual blade is actually approaching the timber from this way, and it's going to slide over those emerging fibers in this direction and give us a really clean cut. I can make cuts in that direction there, and I'm not pulling up any timber fibers. I'm getting these smooth little ribbons. Now, if we were doing this from below, and so in this case, my router bit would be spinning anti-clockwise, our blade would actually be approaching this timber from the other direction. Yeah, you can see that the blade is diving into the fiber instead of sliding over the top. And this is essentially tear out, because the blade then rips that fiber out and you're left with a big hole there. We need to be really aware of the direction that the router bit is moving and the direction the blade is hitting the timber when we're doing curves, because that tear out can ruin a piece really rapidly. Very often, once you've torn out a big chunk, there's no way of fixing it, or it's very challenging to fix. That is one of the reasons that a double bearing router bit like this, I think this might be called the ultimate flush trim bit, is really useful. Because if we're doing this work in a router table, which is my preference, we can do some of the bits with the bearing on the bottom and some of the bits with the bearing on the top by just raising or lowering the router bit and flipping the work over so that the template is always touching a bearing, top or bottom, depending on where we want to go. That is a good solution a lot of the time. The other way that we can try and avoid tear out is in very certain situations, we can climb cut, which means we're actually going to be routing in reverse. In order to simplify things when I'm following a template like this and using a double bearing router bit, is I'm going to move my fence completely out of the way. This means that I can always be cutting on the front edge of the blade and keep track of which direction the router blade is moving. So you can see that the router blade is always going to be moving in that direction, and I'm going to be always trying to move the timber to oppose that in the opposite direction. So we can have a look at the wood grain here and see which parts we want to do from the top where I'm standing now. So as we were talking about before, if this router bit engages here, it's going to tear out. So I'm going to put big X's here, but from here forward, we're going to be cutting downhill. So we want to cut that part here. This cut is a very slight taper into the wood grain, which means that this cut along here could potentially result in some tear out, although this section right here, we definitely want to do from this side. And then maybe do this section from the other side. Okay, here, let's see. We don't want to do that section there, but we do want to do this section here. And in theory, we should be able to do this whole section here right up to not this bit. Now it's complicated because we actually change directions here because there's a joint in the timber. Just because we've cut close to the line and you can see that there's, 3 or 4 mil of timber remaining, doesn't mean we need to cut all of that timber in one go. We could approach the router bit and not press the bearing right up into the template and do a few shallow passes before we actually engage that bearing. Those first few passes are kind of freehand, but you can't go too far because the template's in the place, and it means that you're putting less work on the router bit, which means less vibration, which means a higher quality of finish and less chance of tear out. All right, let's have a go. So I will do the bits that I've marked out as good to go from the top side, and then I'll flip it over and do the other bits from the other side. And I'll probably have to move the height on the router bit when I do that. So now we can take this template off, totally reusable, we haven't hurt it in any way, and we have our shape. From here we can do any other shaping we need to do, round over, that sort of thing. Bit of sanding, but actually all of these curves are exactly where I want them to be. They're pretty smooth, I don't have any tear out. The double bearing router bits are phenomenal for this kind of work. You just need to take good care that you always know if you need the bearing up or down, and take that extra moment at the start to write on the piece which direction you're going to be traveling. So I went from having 4 squarish looking blanks to 4 pieces that are shaped with the curve in the exact profile that I want. We managed to avoid tear out on all of them, which is just really important because you can't fix tear out a lot of the time, or it's very challenging. These double bearing router bits are really the key to avoiding tear out and getting a good finish on these, because it allows you to go both directions so that you're always moving downhill with the grain rather than cutting into it when you're going to get tear out. So you can get giant ones all the way down to little itty bitty ones. And I mean, if you don't have a double-ended trimming or pattern following bit like this, you can just use a standard pattern following bit, which has just one bearing down the bottom. But it just doesn't allow you to do that double-sided thing as easily. You'd need a template on both sides of your work, which is hard to align. This is really the simplest way to do it, but you have to take care of the grain direction. There are certain times when you can't tell exactly what the grain direction is. These are very slight tapers here, and it's not always clear where the grain is running out and where it's running in. So what I had to do was just kind of take shallow passes and feel it and see if there was any of that tear out noise. As you watch the video of me doing these cutting, you'll see lots of occasions where I'm not just running through and taking that full amount off in one pass. I'm doing lots and lots of little shallow passes to get down to the bottom. And that means I'm going to reduce the chance of tear out in almost every case. Very often, you'll need to move in that direction here and that direction right here. So you need to approach that corner with care and route one way and then flip it over and route the other. You can write some of those instructions of where to route and where not to route on the template, but this template only sits on one side of the work, so you're always going to have to write it on the other side as well. From this point, I just have a lot more shaping to do to put this table together. Over the next couple of weeks, there'll probably be some other videos that look at different processes that I'm using in this table. I have to install some more sauce hinges, so there's another opportunity to make a video about messing up sauce hinges. I really hope you got something out of this. This is a really useful technique that allows you to use shapes that you just kind of couldn't otherwise easily do. If you have access to a CNC or a shaper origin, you could do that, but this is actually a really simple and quick way of doing it. From here, you can do any kind of other shaping that you need to do. So a lot of these are going to have a pretty severe round over on them. It's going to look really flowy and organic. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you've got something out of this video. There'll be some links down below to the router bits that I've used, and I'll see you next week for something else.